Ever heard of a king who took the throne not by birthright, but by force? A king who deposed his own cousin. Welcome to the dramatic, bloody, and fascinating story of the House of Lancaster, the dynasty that wore England's famous red rose. Our story begins not with a king, but with the powerful Duke John of Gaunt, the third surviving son of the mighty King Edward III. Gaunt was one of the wealthiest men in Europe, a power player in his own right. His son, Henry Bolingbroke, was ambitious, charismatic, and a skilled warrior. He was also deeply resentful of his cousin, King Richard II. Richard was seen by many as a tyrant, extravagant, vindictive, and out of touch with his people. When John of Gaunt died, Richard made a fatal mistake. He disinherited Henry Bolingbroke and exiled him for life. He basically stole Henry's vast fortune. This was a step too far. While Richard was away on campaign in Ireland, Henry saw his chance. He landed in England in 1399, claiming he was only there to reclaim his rightful inheritance, the Duchy of Lancaster. But support for him snowballed. The English nobility, tired of Richard's rule, flocked to Henry's banner. It quickly became clear this wasn't just about a duke, it was about the crown itself. Richard II returned to find his kingdom had turned against him. He was captured, forced to abdicate, and imprisoned in Pontefract Castle, where he died shortly after, likely starved to death. Henry Bolingbroke was crowned King Henry IV, the first Lancastrian king. But seizing a crown is one thing, holding on to it is another. Henry IV's reign was plagued by rebellions. He was seen by many as a usurper, a king whose claim was based on conquest, not God-given right. He faced uprisings from the Welsh, led by the legendary Owain Glyndwr, and from powerful English nobles like the Percy family, who had once been his allies. He spent most of his reign putting out fires, constantly fighting to secure his shaky throne. Plagued by poor health, which some saw as divine punishment, he died in 1413, leaving the crown to his son. That son was the man who would become England's greatest hero, King Henry V. Where his father was a troubled usurper, Henry V was a born warrior king. He was determined to legitimize the Lancastrian dynasty once and for all, and he knew just how to do it. By reviving the Old English claim to the throne of France. This led to the famous 100 Years' War. In 1415, against all odds, Henry V led his exhausted, outnumbered English army to a stunning victory at the Battle of Agincourt. It was a legendary triumph that cemented his place in history. He became a symbol of English courage and might. Shakespeare would later immortalize his famous speech, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers." Henry's success was astonishing. He conquered vast swaths of France and, through the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, was named the heir to the French throne. He even married the French king's daughter, Catherine of Valois. It seemed the Lancastrians had not only secured England but were on the verge of uniting the crowns of England and France. The future looked incredibly bright. But then, tragedy struck. At the very height of his power, in 1422, Henry V died suddenly from dysentery while on campaign. He was only 35 years old. He left his kingdom and his claim to France to his only son, an infant less than a year old, Henry VI. And this is where the Lancastrian dream began to unravel. Henry VI grew up to be the polar opposite of his father. He was pious, gentle, and utterly unsuited for the brutal politics of the 15th century. He hated warfare and was highly manipulated by the powerful nobles and his ambitious wife, Margaret of Anjou. Under his weak rule, England's fortunes in France crumbled. Inspired by Joan of Arc, the French rallied and began to push the English out. All the territories won by Henry V were lost, except for the port of Calais. The defeat was a national humiliation and created immense political turmoil back home. This weakness at the top created a power vacuum. Powerful nobles began to build private armies and feud with one another. The king suffered from bouts of mental illness, leaving him completely catatonic for months at a time. It was during one of these episodes that another powerful claimant to the throne emerged, Richard, Duke of York. York was descended from the second and fourth sons of Edward III, giving him a claim to the throne that was, arguably, stronger by blood than the Lancastrian claim. The stage was set for a civil war. On one side, the House of Lancaster, symbolized by the red rose, supporting the weak King Henry VI. On the other, the House of York, symbolized by the white rose, led by the ambitious Richard of York. This conflict would tear England apart for the next 30 years. We know it today as the Wars of the Roses. The initial phase of the war saw victories and defeats for both sides. Richard of York was killed in battle, but his cause was taken up by his charismatic and capable son, Edward. In 1461, Edward defeated the Lancastrian forces and deposed Henry VI, crowning himself King Edward IV. The first Yorkist king was on the throne. Henry VI, Margaret of Anjou, and their young son were forced to flee. But the story doesn't end there. For a decade, the Lancastrians lived in exile, plotting their return. Then, in a stunning reversal, a powerful Yorkist ally, the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, switched sides. He helped restore Henry VI to the throne in 1470. But this Lancastrian restoration was short. Edward IV returned from his own exile the following year, decisively defeating and killing Warwick at the Battle of Barnet. A few weeks later, at the Battle of Tewkesbury, the last hope of the Lancastrians was extinguished. Their heir, Prince Edward, was killed, and soon after, the pathetic Henry VI was murdered in the Tower of London. With his death, the direct male line of the House of Lancaster was wiped out. So, was that the end of the Red Rose? Not quite. The Lancastrian claim lived on, albeit through a distant, slightly questionable line, through a man named Henry Tudor. His mother was a descendant of John of Gaunt. In 1485, Henry Tudor landed in Wales, gathered support, and faced the last Yorkist king, Richard III, at the Battle of Bosworth Field. In a dramatic final act, Richard was killed, and Henry Tudor was crowned King Henry VII. To finally end the decades of war, he married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of the Yorkist King Edward IV, uniting the two warring houses. He created a new symbol, the Tudor Rose, combining the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, and founded the Tudor dynasty, which would rule England for over a century. The House of Lancaster, born in usurpation and defined by conflict, rose to the heights of glory with Henry V, only to collapse into tragedy and civil war. But its legacy, its red rose, was ultimately woven into the very fabric of the English crown. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of England's most turbulent periods. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, subscribe for more history, and let me know in the comments which dynasty you'd like to explore next. See you in the next video.